This is what happens when governments decide that a 12-digit number should define who you are. Right now, 186 of 198 countries operate some form of government digital identity system, which means billions of people are being enrolled into databases that track not just who they are, but when, where, and to whom they prove their identity. Unlike the plastic cards sitting in your wallet, these digital systems can report back to the government every single time you use them. Today, we are going to look at how these systems actually work, what the real privacy risks are, and what options you still have to protect yourself. Let's start with what we're actually dealing with here. India's Aadhaar system stands as the largest biometric identity program in human history, covering 1.43 billion people, and that represents 99% of the adult population. Every person enrolled has fingerprints, iris scans, and photographs linked to a unique 12-digit number. What began as a voluntary program for welfare benefits expanded until it became effectively mandatory for banking, mobile phones, and tax filing. And that is when India's Supreme Court stepped in 2018 to limit its scope. The European Union comes next with its eIDAS 2.0 regulation. By December 2026, all 27 member states must offer citizens a digital identity wallet. By November 2027, banks and large online platforms will be required to accept it. Australia passed its Digital ID Act in 2024, with more than 10.5 million Australians now using the system to access over 130 government services. To their credit, Australia built in legal prohibitions against making the system mandatory. The United Kingdom took a different path entirely. Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced in September 2025 that digital ID would become mandatory for employment verification by 2029, and the public response came immediately. A petition against mandatory digital ID gathered 2.9 million signatures, making it one of the largest in United Kingdom parliamentary history. China launched its Internet ID system in July 2025, requiring facial recognition scans to generate what they call a network ID number. Here is the context that matters. China already operates an estimated 700 million surveillance cameras domestically, so the digital ID becomes another layer on top of that existing infrastructure. Here is the core issue that privacy advocates have warned about for years. When you show someone a physical driver's license, you hand it over, they glance at it, and they hand it back. No record gets created, no database gets updated, and nobody else knows that transaction occurred. This is how many interactions remain private and untracked. Digital identity systems can operate in a completely different way. The American Civil Liberties Union calls it phone home capability, meaning the system can notify the government every time your identity credential gets used. Jay Stanley, senior policy analyst at the American Civil Liberties Union, put it bluntly, creating a system through which the government can track us anytime we use our driver's license is an Orwellian nightmare. Centralized databases also create what the Electronic Frontier Foundation calls irresistible targets for identity thieves. Look at what happened in India, where a data breach in October 2023 allegedly exposed 815 million records, including Aadhaar numbers. Back in January 2018, a Tribune newspaper investigation discovered that Aadhaar database access was being sold for about 500 rupees, roughly $6, through WhatsApp groups. Here is what makes biometric data different from everything else. Unlike a password, you cannot change your fingerprints or your iris pattern if they get stolen. Once that data is compromised, it remains compromised forever. Privacy International has documented another pattern they call mission creep, where identity systems create their own reality. They create a situation where identification is needed for more things and more actors. What starts as optional for one service becomes required for another, then another, until opting out becomes practically impossible. To be fair, there are legitimate arguments for digital identity systems. 800 million people globally lack any form of official identification according to the World Bank. And without ID, those people cannot open bank accounts, get formal employment, or access health care. India's government claims that Aadhaar helped eliminate 415 million fake cooking gas connections and 503 million duplicate ration cards. But here is where it gets complicated. A study by JPAL looking at India found that making biometrics compulsory in food distribution created exclusion problems and increased transaction costs for vulnerable groups without reducing corruption. Their description of the outcome was pain without gain. The data on who gets excluded tells its own story. About 40% of people over 65 do not own smartphones, and around 25% of people earning under $30,000 a year lack them too. What can you actually do about all of this? More than you might expect. Citizens in the European Union benefit from explicit protections, since the digital wallet is voluntary and free, with full rights under the General Data Protection Regulation remaining intact. Australia's Digital ID Act contains legal prohibitions against making the system mandatory, with specific language requiring that comparable non-digital services must be available. India's 2018 Supreme Court ruling carried real weight. Aadhaar is not mandatory for bank accounts, mobile SIM cards, school admissions, or exams, and the requirement only applies to welfare benefits and tax filing. Several countries have seen successful court challenges against digital ID implementations. Kenya's High Court declared their digital ID rollout illegal in 2021 because the government had not completed a privacy impact assessment. Jamaica's Supreme Court found their proposed digital ID unconstitutional. Taiwan suspended their program in 2021 after citizens brought a legal challenge. The American Civil Liberties Union published specific protections to push for. These include prohibiting ID issuers from tracking when credentials get used, requiring that users control what data gets released, preserving the right to not use digital ID at all, requiring continued acceptance of physical IDs on an equal basis, and prohibiting centralized logging of transactions. Privacy-preserving technologies can be built into these systems if governments decide to include them. Selective disclosure lets you prove you are over 18 without revealing your birth date. On-device storage keeps data on your phone rather than in a government database. The question becomes whether governments will actually implement these protections, and that depends largely on how much public pressure they face. Government digital identity systems now operate in 186 of 198 countries, making this one of the largest shifts in how citizens interact with their governments in modern history. The technology itself is not inherently good or bad, because what matters is how it is designed, who controls it, and what rights citizens keep. Legal challenges have succeeded in Kenya, Jamaica, Taiwan, and India. Public pressure has created real pushback in the UK and Australia. Whether digital identity becomes a tool for convenience or a tool for control has not been decided yet, and that outcome depends on what citizens demand, what courts rule, and what legislatures require. The trap only closes if we let it.